So this is the camera that I'm using to create a lot of these images. It's a Century 2 Kodak 8x10 camera. It's probably 70 or 80 years old, but I'm using a period lens. So I'm using a gas Chardonnay lens that's French build, and it's probably around 140 years old. So it's a period lens from when wet plate photography was kind of in its heyday. So it's this nice brass barreled optical device that's got hand ground glass in it. It's called a Petzval design. And this lens in particular has this really nice focal spot in the center, but then very quickly creates these lenticular aberrations. And you get this fantastical swirling that happens around the subject kind of very quickly after you move from fine focus. But for the portraiture stuff, I've been using just a kind of wide open setting. And that gives me this kind of dramatic, I guess, sharp and soft focus combination. So there's a very shallow kind of plane of focus. This array of lights is what I use to make my exposures. What these are basically artificial sunlight. The emulsion that we're making and pouring onto these plates is pretty slow. It would take a long time under this light to create an exposure. But with these strobes, I'm forcing about 4,500 watt seconds of UV balanced light at my subject, and so my exposure is instantaneous. This is a piece of trophy aluminum, and it's anodized black, and it comes with this really nice plastic coating, which once you peel it off, reveals a perfectly clean kind of surface that will accept the collodion in combination with, I think, cadmium bromide, some iodines to facilitate the creation of light-sensitive silver salts. And it's also kind of kept in suspension in a solution of ether and grain alcohol. So that's why we're doing this outside, so we have lots of ventilation. So you pour this stuff on and it has this gelatin response, and in about 30 seconds to a minute it starts to gel up, so it's no longer dripping. And this is the kind of medium that's going to accept the silver nitrate. And the silver nitrate will combine with those bromides and iodides to create light-sensitive silver salts. And this is my bath of silver nitrate. So this is probably ready now. It's been about 3 minutes, and we'll see how our plate is doing. Very carefully drop the plate. You let the excess silver drain off. Wipe off the excess, at least off the back. You don't want to touch the surface because that's essentially your 8x10 negative. It's called wet plate, this process, because the plate has to remain wet throughout the whole process. So we have about a 10-minute window now to go expose the plate, come back, and start the development. If it dries, we don't get an image. And that's why, you know, you see those pictures of the itinerant photographer with their covered wagon, because they had to very quickly go and develop the plate. And that was until about 1880. So this is how it will go. I will go back there one more time and get a fine focus, and I'll ask you to stay really still. And when you're ready, you tell me, and you'll have to stay still for this long. So I'll come up, cap this, take the plate holder, put it in, pull out the dark slide, open this, fire the flash, and then cap it again. And so that takes about 7 seconds. You can blink, but don't talk or move your head if at all possible. Okay. Okay, here we go. All right. We've got the exposure and you can relax. Ferrous sulfate developer, it's basically iron fertilizer and in glacial acetic acid, or just a really acidic medium. You can use vinegar, white vinegar. You just kind of flood the plate here and let the surface tension of the solution keep the developer on the plate. Because it's a negative image on a black substrate, when we introduce it to the fixer and clear the unused silver, so you get an instant positive. So these tintypes were, really the first Polaroids. And that's something that's also kind of amazing about them. There's this immediate gratification. After the alchemy, after being run through a fairly easy and forgiving chemical process. I mean, if you think about these itinerant photographers out on the land making these images, the process had to be really forgiving in order for it to be as useful and successful as it was. So basically I've rinsed off the developer, and now this is pretty much light safe. So I'm introducing it into the fix here, and this is where the magic happens. The traditional fixer is a cyanide sulfate solution. Because the developer has acid in it, one of the worst things that can happen is you can introduce developer into your cyanide solution and it will release cyanide gas and potentially kill you. But I'm not interested in being that historically accurate with the process. The process, as I was taught it, was you take an alcohol lamp. It's warming up the plate and getting it ready to accept the varnish, which has sandarac tree sap, lavender oil, and grain alcohol, kind of keeping it all flowing together. And I think the heat kind of better enables the oils and the tree sap to mesh with the emulsion that is on the face of this plate. It's very fragile at this point. And that silver kind of layer is really thin. And it's very easy to damage. So you could take your finger and just kind of rub the emulsion right off, and then it would be marred for forever. The other thing that the sandarac tree sap does is it seals it. So it keeps oxygen from getting to the surface. And this is the traditional recipe. I've gotten all of my stuff and most of my knowledge about this process from Bostic and Sullivan, which is a company here in Santa Fe that has been keeping these historic vernacular photographic processes alive for the last 30 years. And I think in many ways is kind of responsible for the resurgence of the wet plate technique. So it's a very similar process to another step in the wet plate process where you're actually pouring a collodion on a piece of black anodized aluminum. So I want to kind of avoid bringing this into contact with the flame, the open flame, because it will catch on fire and you will have a flambéed tintype or worse. It's actually happened to me quite a few times, and most of the time you can just give it a really strong blow and it'll put the flame out. I'm actually trying to let all of the varnish drip off the corner here. So I don't want any amount of liquid varnish sitting on here. And it's actually starting to set up as well. And you wear gloves with this process just because the varnish does kind of tack up, and you'll go through the rest of your day smelling like a lavender scented 19th century sitting room or something. I've been interested for a long time. I've been familiar with the process since grad school. I went to the University of New Mexico and left there in 1997 without ever taking a class in digital photography. You know, all of my work has really been self-taught in terms of the digital realm. You know, I think photography's lost a little bit of its magic in some ways. So this gives me the opportunity to kind of experience that again. This is the last step in the process. So I do this varnishing kind of as a final protection for the plate, and it, it resists oxidation and the image won't tarnish and go black. And then I gift it back to the sitter. Before I do this process, immediately before I scan the image. And so those images, from those files, I can create prints that are 40 by 60 inches, and they're still tack sharp. They've almost lost no kind of resolution in the enlargement. This body of work by Richard Avedon, called In the American West, where he, shot for 8 by 10 negatives of folks across the country in the American Southwest. He was shooting the 8 by 10, but then when he displayed them, he presented them as either life-size or larger. And, you could do that because an 8 by 10 negative has so much information in it. And that's essentially what I'm creating here. This is a response in some ways to Curtis's opus, The North American Indian. He did this amazing project from 1907 to about 1930, where he tried to capture native North America at its state, kind of with the idea that sudden kind of economic, political, cultural change was happening. And so he kind of wanted to save these images of a vanishing race. Those were his words, not mine. And so I want to kind of update the image that was created that has been so prevalent kind of in, I think, the American subconsciousness about what Native Americans kind of look like, who they are. We've kind of been frozen in this moment. And so I'm using a similar photographic historical process. So the emulsion is particularly sensitive to UV, to blue light. And because of that, people who have red in their skins, like brown people, don't resolve as well, essentially. It's kind of like putting a red filter over your camera, you get this darker image. And so I think that the people that Curtis photographed were, just in terms of skin tone, a few stops lighter than they actually appear. I think, though, overall, it's also about trying to bring back the magic, the intimacy of the studio portrait process, and sharing with people this amazing historic technology, and really the alchemy that's involved in producing these images. It's as much as about the process that got to the object as it is about the actual object.